The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it had in our lives, we do not promote or endorse any 12-Step Anonymous program. It's time for the Share Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host,
On today's episode of the Share Podcast, Sarah, now 35 years old and 11 years clean, takes us through 10 years of active addiction. From the age of 14, Sarah developed an unhealthy love affair with weed and boys. So throughout high school, Sarah's addiction revolved around her need to get attention from boys and smoking weed. When Sarah discovered alcohol, she completely bypassed being a social drinker and moved right into blackout drinking. She hated the taste of alcohol, so her only motivation for drinking was to get completely wasted. In college, Sarah moves to Oregon and starts dabbling in psychedelic drugs and ecstasy, as well as selling weed. Her addiction kicks into full gear when she starts traveling abroad and cannot find her drug of choice. At this point, her alcohol abuse kicks into full gear as she unsuccessfully tries to substitute marijuana for alcohol. As she travels through countries all over Central America, the blackout drinking takes Sarah to dangerously dark places. She finally finds her way to Costa Rica, and cocaine abuse ultimately brings Sarah to her bottom and into recovery. It's an amazing, heartfelt journey of recovery. Join us now. Hey, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show today. How you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I'm so excited to be talking to you. It's awesome.
It's great to hear your voice. I mean, it's just been so long.
I know.
This is actually a little weird.
It is. I was having total memories, and it was just really nice because I'm so in my own little microcosm here in my little life, and it just reminded me, oh yeah, I have friends all over the place, and I'm not alone, that just, I was just telling my husband about you, and I was saying how, you always let me stay with you and took me to meetings when I was in town, and I don't think I would have stayed sober if I hadn't connected with you and Alita and Lane and all those people in NA up there.
At the time, we were all pretty new in recovery. How much time you got now?
Almost 12 years.
Oh, so we all had about the same time.
Yeah, I had 2.5 years at the time. It was a while ago. And I heard you mention on the podcast that your daughter was 12. And I was just no fucking way. I remember going to her house with you and seeing her, and she was 2.
Yeah.
That would be 10 years ago. It's just crazy. It's just...
You ready to get started?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's dive right in. Tell us about how your life is today, your hobbies, what you do for a living. Take us into your normal daily routine, including recovery.
Okay, well, my life today is very, very full and full of a lot of children. I'm a teacher, so I teach 4th grade. I'm married, and I have a son who's 7 and a stepdaughter who is 14, almost 15. And right now, 2 nephews living with us. So I have a very full house, but things that I really enjoy doing, and I do when I get a chance, is I like to make jewelry and play music, and I like to work out, I like to run, and I like to do yoga, and I also teach yoga to kids after school, which is really fun. And I'm pretty much just kind of normal grown-up human being, which is totally crazy, but I am.
Are you still doing your jewelry?
Yeah, I'm not as much, obviously, because I'm busy. But, yeah, I have an Etsy site, and, yeah, I still love doing it. Just the things that I used to have more time for are just now hobbies when I have a chance, So, but one of the best things about being a teacher is summer's off. So I get to kind of do all my other stuff I love during the summer, which is nice.
Yeah, and I also remember you were doing all kinds of stuff when I met you. Mm-hmm. I think it was Reiki.
Yeah, I still do Reiki.
Okay, so you're a Reiki master, and yeah, you do all that kind of stuff. And for those of you listening, this is Sarah C., the one who painted the HP baby shell that is on the About the Share podcast. All right, she is my good friend Sarah that I've known for, God, how long has it been? 12 years now? 10 years?
Yeah, really.
Long time. I have treasured that shell and kept it with me all these years in the safest places, still in the same condition. I got it.
It looks really nice. I was really impressed with my handiwork when I saw it. I was like, wow, I was pretty good at that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I don't even have any. I don't have any anymore, so I'll have to come back to Costa Rica and paint myself another shell at some point.
You're going to need your own HP baby.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But that tradition was from the meeting long before I started going to it. And my sponsor in Costa Rica, who passed away a few years ago, Giselle, that was her deal. She used to paint the shells. And then when I came, I started painting the shells. And before I moved away, I remember I painted like hundreds of them because I was really afraid if I left the meeting, you know, what would they do without someone to paint the shells? So that was very important. So
we have to keep that tradition alive some way, somehow.
Yes.
So, Sarah, tell us, how much clean time do you have now, and when is your anniversary date?
11 and a half years. My anniversary date is July 31st, 2003.
Excellent. And let's talk a little bit about when you first started drinking and using drugs.
Okay.
How old were you the first time you drank or used drugs, and more importantly, how did that make you feel?
I'm pretty sure I was 14. I was a freshman in high school and maybe 8th grade. I'm not sure. But I always say that my first addiction was to boys and attention. And I had a boyfriend at the time whose family had, like, no rules. You know, they were the household where the parents drank and everybody was partying all the time, and incredibly different from my family. And I just thought their whole family was, like, amazing. You know, they took me to see the Grateful Dead and all this stuff. And his brothers and sisters were all older, and they all smoked pot and drank. And I remember just really wanting to try it. And them being, like, not sure if they should let me or not because I was young. And I just convinced them. And, you know, I smoked pot before I drank. And that was my drug of choice for a long time. And I remember we were up in Danny's attic. That was my boyfriend. And they had a bong. And they showed me how to use it. And I took a couple hits from the bong. And they're like, you know, sometimes you don't get high your first time. And, like, almost immediately after they said that, I felt really high. And I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. And I remember there was a guy there playing the guitar, and I was just like mesmerized by the guitar. And I ate 3 bowls of Cap'n Crunch cereal, and it tasted so good. I just remember being like, this is the best. You know, a lot of people talk about that, like with alcohol, like that warm, fuzzy feeling of that first drink going down. And mine was definitely weed all the way. And from the second I tried it, I wanted to feel that way all the time, every day.
I remember how awesome Captain Crunch tasted when you're high.
Yeah, it was definitely my thing. And, you know, drinking and other drugs are definitely what took me down. But I was a daily pot smoker for years and years and years and years. And, yeah, that was definitely my... everything's okay, you know.
And you were how old?
13 or 14.
Wow, super young.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I became a daily user until I was probably 16. So, you know, not that long, actually. But, yeah, there was...
I wouldn't consider that a late bloomer.
No.
All right, well, you're completely warmed up, so I'm going to turn this show over to you, Sarah.
Okay.
It's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally your journey into recovery up until today. So, Sarah,
okay.
take it away.
So I grew up in a suburb of Chicago in Wilmette, Illinois, which is a very, very wealthy, beautiful, pristine community, but it's kind of like what everything in the world looks like, but on steroids. The cars are bigger, the houses are bigger, the lawns are bigger, the diamonds are bigger, the portions are bigger, everything's bigger. And I can remember as a kid, I was very sensitive. I can remember my mom telling me I didn't have to cry about everything, and that, like, I could stop crying if I wanted to. And I just remember being like, I can't. You know, I was just always extremely sensitive, and I had a lot of fear and anxiety, although I would have never known that at the time. My parents even made up a name for it. They said I had the scaries because I thought everything was scary. And I can just remember being afraid to walk to school. And I lived 2 doors away from my elementary school. And I was terrified someone was going to come grab me and, like, take me away. I just always had that fear. I was a little bit chubby growing up, so I always felt kind of uncomfortable and just out of place. And I had 2 best friends, so we were like a threesome best friend situation, and that's never a good idea because you always feel left out when there's 3, you know. And so just growing up, I always had those feelings, and I started liking boys. I can remember in 4th grade I had a boyfriend, so boys were definitely my thing before anything else, and attention. And it made me feel good, and it made me feel validated and important and beautiful and all of those things. And yeah, I started drinking and using when I was around 13 or 14. And I just explained my drug of choice was pot, but I definitely drank too. And I never drank because I liked the taste of alcohol. I drank to get really fucked up. And I never, ever remember feeling buzzed, ever. All I remember is feeling sober and then being trashed. You know, I would drink so fast and so much, and my tolerance was low, and that's what I was after. I didn't want to, like, be nicely buzzed. I wanted to be obliterated. I was a blackout drinker from the get-go, and things happened, you know, in blackouts that I didn't remember, and as I got older, they got, you know, more and more frequent. In high school, it only happened a few times. And mainly I was just really into weed, and I dated drug dealers a lot so I could get what I needed, and, you know, had crazy dramatic relationships and all that stuff. But all the while, like, managed to kind of maintain pretty look good, and I got decent grades. And by the time I was a senior in high school, my boyfriend was like 25 or something ridiculous, and he was a drug dealer, and he would come pick me up every day, you know, from school, and we'd just get high together and whatever. But somehow I pulled it together and went to college. And when I got to college, oh my God, that was when it was really on. So I grew up in Chicago and moved to Oregon, where I live now. I went to school in Eugene. I was a duck. And when I first got there and I smoked the weed there, I was just like, this is paradise. This is where I belong. You know, people have drum circles and they're listening to music and they have amazing weed. Like, I was so happy, you know. And
it was the best weed over there.
It was good. And, you know, in college, I got good grades. You know, I somehow managed to kind of have that double life where it didn't take me down to the point where I had, like, real extreme consequences. You know, I think about I used to smuggle drugs back from Oregon to Chicago in the summertime because I could sell it and make a lot of money and support my own habit. I think about that now. It's just like, oh my God, like, I was a nice little Jewish girl from Chicago. I had no business doing that stuff. I could have been in jail. Like, so many things could have happened to me. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So, you know, smoked a lot of weed, drank a lot, got in trouble, took a lot of psychedelics and ecstasy and all that stuff, and all the while had lots of boyfriends and lots of insanity. And I forgot to mention that when I was in high school, I did this program called Amigos de las Americas, and I went to Paraguay, and I lived in Paraguay for a summer. And then I went back the following summer and lived in Ecuador, and that's when I learned Spanish. And those times were sort of like small reprieves from my alcoholism and my insanity. I didn't drink and use when I was on those trips.
Really?
Not true. I totally drank in Ecuador whenever I could. I got it. But when I was on those trips, I felt like this great purpose. And I really was connected to what I was doing. And it mattered to me in a way that nothing had ever mattered to me before. And I truly believe that those experiences really shaped the person that I was going to become, you know, professionally and otherwise, because it gave me this love for travel and a love for Spanish. And so when I was in college, I did a study abroad in Spain, and I lived in Spain for a year. And I could not get my hands on any weed. I could get some hash, but, you know, I was a big pot smoker at that point. And so that's when I started drinking every day, because I couldn't get I couldn't get my daily fix the way I wanted it. And of course I wasn't 21 yet, but it didn't matter over there. And, you know, you get a bottle of wine cheaper than a bottle of Coca-Cola, literally.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, I became a big wine aficionado, and I drank a lot. And that was when I had a couple of really scary blackouts in a foreign country where I was all by myself and woke up with, guys I didn't know and didn't know how I had gotten there or where I was, like literally didn't know where I was. And then after my study abroad, I traveled Europe by myself. I do not know, Omar, how I didn't get killed. I mean, I don't know how I survived that. I spent 2.5 months drunk and high, out of my mind, as a young girl traveling around Europe by myself. I don't even know. I actually do remember going to bed in Austria one night and waking up in northern Italy. I crossed a border in a blackout. Don't even know.
Jesus.
And each place I went when I was traveling alone, I hitched onto a guy. Like there was always some guy. It was just, that was my survival. That was what I knew to do. So when I went back to college, in the meantime, some bad things had happened to me, which is kind of what happens when you behave that way. And as a result of those bad things happening to me, I felt really bad about myself, and I had a lot of pain and trauma that I didn't know how to deal with. So I drank and used more, and I ended up getting engaged to this guy. I don't even know why. I don't know. Anyway, he drank like I did. He drank way more than I did, actually. And so I could always, look at his problem. You need to pull your shit together. And I remember one time going through the house, and he had, hidden alcohol everywhere. And I was just shocked that he could be doing that. And I remember dumping it out. And I remember thinking, God, this is so wasteful. I can't believe I'm dumping out this booze. But
how old were you?
That was when I was a senior in college. So we broke up. I moved back in with my parents after college because I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I really was, I think in many ways, I just did not want the party to stop. If the party stopped, then I'd have to face my life and I'd have to do something with it. And that thought was so terrifying to me. So I had a friend in Costa Rica. So I decided to go move to Costa Rica. And I actually remember thinking, because I had gotten to a point when I was living with my parents in Chicago. It was a brief time. It was probably 6 months where I was doing cocaine every day. And, I was just alone in my parents' house, in my room, doing drugs and really miserable, doing nothing with my life. And so I went to Costa Rica, and I can remember thinking, I'm going to just go have this super healthy life in Costa Rica. I'm going to learn how to surf. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm not going to drink. And I get to Tamarindo.
Oh.
Within 5 minutes, I find cocaine,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I was off and running. I did not learn how to surf. I was barely ever even awake when the sun was out. I was a total vampire. I lived at the beach, and I remember just vividly hating waking up at 1:00 in the afternoon and it being so hot and me being sweaty and hungover and having to go outside in that sun. It was just a disgusting life. I had a boyfriend there, and I got a job at this awesome surfer bar, and that was my I had arrived. In Bill's story, it talks about that was it. I worked at the coolest bar. I had this cool boyfriend, and I really thought life was awesome, and I could drink and use how I wanted. And I think there was probably a 2 or 3 week period where it was great, and it was so fun, and it was amazing. And then I spent the next year trying to recapture those 2 weeks, and just. Yeah, anyway, so he finally broke up with me very publicly, and somehow I got into a fight that night and got a black eye. He didn't give it to me, but I don't know how it happened. And the next day, this woman, I was sitting at a pool, and I was really baked, and this woman was talking to me and saying how she had 20 years sober. And I remember being like, why? That's the thing I've ever heard, that. Who would want that? And she's looking at me with my black eye, my hangover, and she's like, well, you don't look like you're doing so hot. And I was like, whatever, I'm fine. And she used to come to the bar and just be like, how are you, Sarah? How are you doing, Sarah? And I just never understood, why is she always trying to see how I'm doing? And I'd always be like, oh, I'm great, totally playing it off. And so finally, I got to a place where I was publicly humiliated by the boyfriend. And I knew she was in AA because she had told me about it. And I went to her house one night with the intention that she was going to explain to me how I really wasn't an alcoholic and how it was going to be fine. And I got there, and I kind of told her a little bit what was going on, and she gave me a big book. The 4th edition had just come out, and she had just gone back to New York and gotten it. She said, I knew I got this for a reason, and she gave it to me, and she said, now read Bill's story and then come back and tell me if you think you're an alcoholic. And I went home, and I did not read Bill's story, and I decided that I wasn't going to drink for a while. But I was still going to smoke pot and take pills and just not do cocaine or drink. In the meantime, I was like reading that book, and I was reading the stories in the back of the book while smoking pot in bed, at night. I remember reading this one story called Crossing the River of Denial. It says, like the little caption underneath says, whenever she enjoyed her drinking, she couldn't control it, and whenever she controlled it, she couldn't enjoy it. I remember getting that weird shiver down my spine. Oh, my God, that's me. But I wasn't ready for that to be me, so I didn't think about it. It was like that one moment, and then it also said in that, and didn't everybody have blackouts? I used to joke about how blackouts were so great because you save so much time in transit. One minute you were here, and the next you were there. And then it says, what I was really doing was solidifying my unfaltering denial. That was me to a T. And by the time I was at that point in my drinking, I blacked out every time I drank, every single time I drank. I thought I was getting better when I was doing so much cocaine that I wasn't blacking out anymore. And I stayed my version of sober for about 60 days, and I went to the meetings in Tamarindo, and I met Giselle, who would later become my sponsor, and Denise, pretty much Ellen, Giselle, and Denise. They were very nice to me, and I told them I wasn't an alcoholic, and I wasn't going to stop smoking pot because that had nothing to do with it. And I even took a 30-day coin, and they gave me one, We're like, okay, Sarah, whatever. And then the boyfriend took me back. Life got a little better. And I decided that on my birthday, it was my 24th birthday, I decided that clearly I was not alcoholic because I had been able to not drink for 60-some days. So I was going to drink for my birthday. And I told everybody this like days before, and they were all excited for me because we were all going to drink together and have fun. And I remember my plan was going to be I was going to have 3 drinks, 1 every hour. I wasn't going to take any shots, and I wasn't going to do any coke. I went in, had my drink, and immediately was like, this isn't going to work. I knew I needed to have more. I needed to have shots. And I didn't even worry about it. My resolve was gone. It was just like, whatever. And by the end of the night, I was off doing coke and getting myself in trouble. So long story short from there, that was April 2nd, 2003. My sobriety date is July 31st, 2003. And in that time, that boyfriend that I had ended up getting dengue fever and getting really sick and having to go back to the States. In the time that he was gone, I decided to start dating someone else in Tamarindo, very small town where everybody knows everybody. Oh, yeah. Literally could not be alone for like 2 seconds. I just couldn't. And this guy was way more into drugs than I was, and that's saying a lot. And so, my last couple of weeks in Costa Rica were disgusting. And I remember we used to joke around. We'd say, sex, love, and rock and roll, cheese and crackers for breakfast, because you'd wake up and there'd be no water and there'd be no nothing. And we'd just like look around at all the crap everywhere. But we found cheese and crackers and we were so happy. It was like just... Oh. Yeah, it was gross. Anyway, so I decided to come home. I thought, you know what, Costa Rica isn't going to work for me anymore. I'm leaving. I'm going to go home. So I went back to Chicago. Within days in Chicago, was causing wreckage there. And I remember going out to dinner with my family and my dad buying some wine for the table and me drinking like all the wine and ordering more that I wasn't paying for, right? And my dad looking at me and being like, I think you've had enough. Then we got home that night and I, got ready to go out. And he's like, you're already drunk. You don't need to go out. And I was like, whatever, Dad, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm fine. He's like, you promise me you're not going to drink anymore? And I said, yeah. I left and I went out that night and did ecstasy and came back at 5 o'clock the next morning. My dad was up getting ready for work. And I remember he looked at me and he was like, you are really messed up. You're an alcoholic. You need help. And I was like, whatever, Dad, whatever. So I decided Chicago wasn't going to work for me. So I decided to drive to Portland because I had one friend here who had no idea what condition I was in.
Oh, my God.
Come live on her couch. And the funny thing is, so that I still had that big book. I left Costa Rica. I left a bunch of stuff in Costa Rica, but somehow I still had that big book that I brought with me. And I had some speaker tapes. I can remember driving across country, listening to the speaker tapes, smoking pot. Just crazy. I went to Vegas. I met the old boyfriend in Vegas, and we hung out for a while, and it was crazy. And then I finally got up to Portland, and both the boyfriends who I had been with, who were not in Tamarindo, were back in Tamarindo now. And I was in Portland, and they figured out that I had been seeing them both. And I was fucked, and I couldn't, it was just such a mess. But somehow the one still forgave me. I don't even know how. And I was...
Because you're adorable.
Thank you. I was staying with my friend Jada, who, she had no idea what she had taken into her home. I convinced her to lend me money for drugs. I slept with, the one guy she asked me not to sleep with.
Of course.
I was a flailing mess. And I got a job, finally. I got a job at a bar because that's what I knew how to do. I knew how to, wear lipstick and a low-cut shirt and get a job that way. I didn't have any other skills. I had already figured out that drinking at work would probably be a bad idea. So my first 3 days at work, I didn't drink, I remember. And I was very lonely and very depressed. I had nothing. I ended up going to this work party. And I remember Jada went with me to the work party, and I had told her and other people I wasn't going to drink at this work party because I wanted to, make a good impression. I walked in, and I remember they were like, "Hey, girls, hard liquor's over there, beer's over there." Boom, I was off and running. Somehow I convinced everybody there to go. Jada left. Jada was so disgusted with me, she left. So at some point in the night, I decided we should all go to a strip club.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Crazy. At some point, and this is very blurry to me because I was in and out of blackouts, but I remember taking my clothes off. And I remember somebody there who worked there telling me to come back the next day because I had gotten a job. So I had somehow decided that stripping in my drunken state was going to be the solution to all my problems.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Really?
Really. And I don't remember much. Funny, though, I remember what I was wearing, which is strange, but I do remember what I was wearing that night. And I don't remember anything after that. And then I woke up. I was with this guy from my work named Bob who had a stutter. Gross, and I remember, opening my eyes and not knowing where I was, and then, looking for my clothes and my purse. And then finally looking at the dude and just ugh, gross. And I went outside, and there was my car. I still had my car, which is also amazing. I remember walking around my car to see if there was dents or blood anywhere or anything, and there was nothing on the car. And then I got in the car and I realized I had no idea where I was. Literally no idea, because I didn't know Portland very well. I'd only been here a few weeks, and I somehow found my way back. I was in Troutdale, which is 40 minutes east of Portland. I was nowhere near Portland. And I got back to Jada's house. My boyfriend in Costa Rica are instant messaging. And he's like, "How was the party last night? Did it go good?" And I was just like, "Oh, my God." And I said, "You need to call me right now." And he called me, and I said, "Oh, Ben, I fucked up again." And I said, "I can't stay here. This isn't going to work for me. Just please buy me a ticket to come back to Costa Rica, please. This isn't going to work." And he was like, "Sarah, I love you. I can't get another phone call from you like this. I really think you need to go back to AA." And I was like, "Well, fuck you then," and hung up the phone. And it's so funny because I haven't told this whole story in years, literally years. So I'm sitting at Jada's house, and we've just had that conversation, and all of a sudden I remembered my book. I remembered my big book, and I pulled it out, and I opened it up to How It Works, and I read How It Works. And I had never heard that read in a meeting before. I know they read it at every single meeting, but I had never heard it in all the meetings I had gone to. I read through the steps, and I remember thinking, "Oh, my God, I can't do this." And then it said, "Many of us exclaimed, 'What an order. I can't go through with this. Don't push.'" And I was like, how did they know, No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. And I had that moment. And what hit me was I realized that I blacked out everywhere I went. I had blacked out in Costa Rica. I had blacked out in Vegas. I had blacked out in Portland. It wasn't the tropical weather. It wasn't, all these other reasons. It was me. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I went online and I found a meeting. And I looked at the schedule. in Tamarindo, there's 2 meetings a week with like 4 people at them. So that's what I thought AA was. And I'm looking at this schedule and there's hundreds of meetings, you know. And so I found this one called Young People's Diversity. And I thought, well, this is perfect. This is my meeting. So I went to the meeting and I remember being really nervous. And it was a meeting where you go around in a circle and share. And I kept thinking the whole time, I wondered if it was going to get to me and what I was going to say if it got to me. It turned out to be the, you know, gay, lesbian, bi, transgendered, and those questioning meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what the diversity part was. I didn't know that. And so I thought I was going to have to tell them I was gay or they were going to kick me out. And I was like panicking on the inside. And then it came to me. I just opened my mouth and I said, my name's Sarah. I'm an alcoholic. I've never said that out loud before. And I kind of talked about what had happened the night before. And I just said, and I really need help. I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. And like all these people just, you know, swarmed me after the meeting. Like, oh, we're going to coffee. Come to coffee. And I was like, I don't know where, I don't have any money. That's okay. We'll pay for you. I just got swooped up. I went home that night and told Jada all about it over some bong hits.
You're the only person I've interviewed who consistently reads literature, speaker tapes, and goes to meetings loaded.
Well, it didn't last long, luckily. Then the next day, I remember I went to another meeting, and I still smoked pot. And then I met this woman who said she would temporarily sponsor me. And so this was like Friday morning, I think, the 31st. This is my sobriety date. And I met her before a noon meeting, and she's like, so do you still have drugs at home? And I was like, well, yeah. I was like, I'm not going to drink, but I don't think I need to stop doing drugs. And she's like, well, let me explain this like sobriety thing to you. So here's how it works. You don't drink, you don't do drugs, you don't take pills, you don't do anything that's going to alter your mind. And I was like, I can't do that. I won't be able to sleep at night. And she goes, yeah, you might be tired, but you could probably take a nap. Could you give it a try for today? And I said, all right, I'll give it a try for today. Do you need me to come over and get rid of all your stuff for you? And I said, no, I'll do it. And I went home and I gave all my pot to Jada. And that was my first day sober.
Wow.
And I did it one day at a time and went to meetings and went out to coffee with people after a few days later. This woman was talking my ear off and I was exhausted and I hadn't been sleeping. And I was like, you know, I was just a mess. I was like scratching myself. I had cuts everywhere. And I was just very unhappy to be out to coffee with all these people. And I remember this woman, the only thing I remember her saying was, let me ask you this. Do you find yourself scoping out guys in meetings? And I was like, oh, how did you know? Because I'm just like you. And I just said, will you be my sponsor? You know, the words came out of my mouth. And she said, sure, I'll be your sponsor. And here's what it means. You'll call me every day. You'll go to a meeting with me at least once a week. We'll get together once a week and do step work. And you need to find a home group and a service commitment. Okay. I set out to do that. I had like 3 or 4 days sober. All of a sudden, it occurred to me that I didn't have anywhere to live, and I didn't have any money, and I didn't have a job. Up until this point, it had not occurred to me that I'd been homeless for like 6 months. I had no idea. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, my God, I need to find a job. I need to find a place to live, and I need to find a meeting, and I need to stay sober. And that was like what I did every day. I just went to meetings. I looked for jobs. I tried to stay sober. I went to a lot of meetings because I didn't have anything else to do. I went to morning meetings, noon meetings, nighttime meetings, and they had cake there, which was awesome, and they had coffee. There's people, I remember at this one meeting, would circle jobs in the newspaper for me. Like, here, you can apply for that. That was when we had to look at the newspaper for jobs, way back when.
Yeah. Wow.
Slowly but surely, like at 30 days sober, my parents gave me $1,500 to put a down payment on an apartment. Up until then, I had been sleeping, you know, on couches and stuff like that. And I got that apartment, and it was the first safe place I had lived in a really long time because I had just lived in such disgusting settings. I just remember I got a bed. That was all I had. I had my apartment, I had my bed, had some toilet paper. That was it. And I remember when the bed came, I cried. I was so happy to have a bed. Slowly, I got some possessions. And then when I had 60 days, I got a job. And, like, you know, I was working the steps, and I was just building this life a little bit at a time. I made some amends to all the boys that I had fucked over and ended up with the boyfriend in Costa Rica forgiving me and deciding that he was going to stay with me. And he came up to visit me a few times. I heard when people said don't change anything for a year, I heard don't move to Costa Rica for a year. That was what I heard. In a year, you're going to graduate from AA, you can move to Costa Rica and live happily ever after. That was what I understood. So I had this boy in Costa Rica. I look back on it now, and that was what motivated me to stay sober. It was not that I'm really healthy and I wanted to take care of myself. I wanted my tropical paradise and my, knight in shining armor, and I'm really grateful for that because it got me to work the steps and it got me to do what I needed to do to stay sober. And so I built like this great community. I learned how to do Reiki, which is, has a lot to do with my spiritual practice. And I started making jewelry and playing music and working in social services and just going to lots of meetings and sponsoring women. And I built this whole awesome network. And then I got a year and then I left. I packed it all up and sold my car and everything I owned and moved down to Costa Rica to be with the boy. Almost the first day I got there, I realized that it wasn't going to work and that he was still drinking and drinking heavily and that he had not let anybody know of his hangout people that his girlfriend who was coming down was sober. So I spent a lot of nights alone in our house while he was out partying and I was really isolated. But the cool thing was I got to make a lot of amends. And I got to go back to employers that I had left and make amends. And I got to live in that town where I had caused a lot of wreckage and give something back. I did Reiki and I taught Spanish and taught English and just did all kinds of great stuff for the community and with the community. And I was of service in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to do things differently, and that was a huge gift. And I got to meet some amazing people. And I went down there with a couple goals. I wanted to practice Reiki and I wanted to make jewelry and I wanted to play music. I wanted to learn how to surf finally and all these things that I had wanted to do the first time. And I got to do all of those things.
How old were you?
25. So I turned 26 and 27 in Costa Rica. The relationship still was very tumultuous and horrible. My sponsor in Costa Rica got me reading some Al-Anon literature at the time, which also ended up becoming something really important to me later. But at that time, I couldn't really relate still. Then my boyfriend got me a dog, Chewbacca, my puppy, my black lab. And at one point, then we broke up. He got me the dog, and then we broke up. So then I was sort of homeless with a dog in Tamarindo for a little while. And I remember that was the hardest time. I would wake up in the morning and feel like I couldn't breathe because it hurt so bad because I had never been sober and heartbroken. That was my dream. That was my everything. That was my whole plan. And it was gone. And I remember laying on the floor just crying and my little Chewy, my puppy, coming up and licking me in the face and being like, we have to go to the beach. You can't lay here. And that dog totally saved my life. I'm sure of it. And I still have him. I still have my Chewbacca.
No.
He's here and he's 12 and he lives in Portland now.
Oh my God, that's a miracle.
I still have my Chewy. So yeah, and then I was going to meetings in Tamarindo and painting shells. And then Jim Bray was there, this guy with fake teeth and a very abrasive personality. And he kept telling me I couldn't say I was an alcoholic and an addict and all that stuff. And he helped me connect with people in San Jose, and that's how I met O and really built a great fellowship. I was able to stay sober because of it. Ultimately, I left. I met a girl. I was just sitting one morning having my coffee, and I met a girl who was a flight attendant for United Airlines. She told me that they were hiring, so I randomly decided to apply, and I got an interview, and I flew up, and I got hired. And so all of a sudden, it was time to leave Costa Rica. It made sense. It was I needed to leave that relationship. I wasn't going to leave it and stay in Tamarindo. I couldn't do it. I had really achieved everything I had gone down there to do, and so it seemed okay. So Chewy and I got on a plane and came back to Chicago. That was where my training was. I went to a speakers meeting and immediately met a gentleman who was a CEO at the world headquarters for United Airlines. Right as I was going in all those little gadgets, all those little things. So I became a flight attendant, and then at the last minute, I was supposed to be in Chicago. They moved me to Washington, D.C. So all of a sudden, I was moving to D.C. where I didn't know anybody and didn't know what I was doing. So I left my dog with my parents, and I went to a speakers meeting in Illinois in Chicago. and was talking to these people about, oh, my God, I'm moving to D.C. I don't know anybody. I don't know what I'm doing. And this guy, Brian, goes, here, I'm going to call my friend Jason. He lives in D.C. So he called Jason, and Jason immediately was like, okay, I'm going to give you like 10 different women's phone numbers, you know, like who are all going to meet you and whatever. And he did. And he hooked me up with like a bunch of women. And one of my first days in D.C., he met me and we went out to coffee. And we somehow discovered that our moms had gone to the same high school together. So I got to D.C. and it was like I instantly had a network and made some really good friends with women. And it's like that's just how the program works. I was a flight attendant. It was really fun. I got to go to meetings all over the world and connect with people. And I was heartbroken and I was in a lot of pain. And I was 3 years sober, had never been alone. And my entire plan was gone now. You know, like I had not planned for that not to work. I had planned to move to tropical paradise, and that was the end of it, and be with the boy and live happily ever after. And now that was over. Really, I mean, I think that for me was probably the first real practice in turning my will and my life over to the care of a higher power. I mean, I think I had done it before, but truly to this point of like, okay, God, I have no idea what's going to happen now. You know, like I thought I knew, but this is all uncharted for me. So I met this boy in San Francisco. He was everything wrong for me, and there were red flags everywhere, and everybody told me so, and I knew it, and I decided he was perfect. So he and I quit flying for United, and he and I moved to Portland because I somehow decided Portland was where I needed to be again. And I got back here and hooked back into some of my old meetings, and it was good to be here. And he ended up, I remember we moved in together, and like within a few days, I had this really bad feeling when he was like having a really hard time, like opening mail or something. And I was like, this was probably a really bad idea. 6 weeks later, I was pregnant. So I decided to try and make it work with him, and it didn't. We gave it a few months, and he ended up being, you know, just not a very good guy. So he left, and I was alone and pregnant. I decided before I found out I was pregnant that I was going to go back to graduate school to become a teacher because I was working in social services, and I didn't think that I was going to go very far in that career, and I knew I wanted to get a master's degree. I just wasn't exactly sure doing what, and somehow I thought being a teacher would be a good thing for me. So the day I found out I was pregnant, I found out that I had, you know, been not accepted, but accepted to apply basically to graduate school. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have a baby and I'm going to go to graduate school. I have no idea how this is going to work. So Sean left. I was alone. Shortly after that, I got robbed. I was in a really bad neighborhood. Yeah. And I was like 7.5 months pregnant. And so I moved in the middle of my pregnancy. And then in the middle of that move, I got food poisoning. And it was the middle of winter, and I got to my new house, and the furnace didn't work. I mean, it was like everything. And as a result of all that stress and trauma, I ended up having my son early. Again, you know, here I had all these plans of how even the labor was going to go, and my birth plan, and what hospital, and all that stuff. I drove myself to the hospital after my water broke.
Get out of here.
And I got there, and they're like, you can't deliver your baby here. Because I was 34 weeks and 6 days pregnant, and you had to be 35 weeks to deliver at that hospital because they didn't have a NICU, like a neonatal intensive care unit. They took me in an ambulance from the hospital I thought I was going to deliver my baby at to a totally different hospital. I mean, it was like, name it.
Oh, my God.
I had my baby, and Sean magically reappeared. Literally, he had been in San Francisco, and someone flew him up to Portland when he found out I was in labor. And he literally walked into the delivery room as I was pushing Dylan out, which is like true form for him, too. Like, don't be around for any of the hard stuff, but show up right at the moment for all the fame and glory. And he held Dylan first, too, which I'm still to this day resentful about, but... So Dylan was in the NICU for 8 days because he was so tiny and premature. So that was pretty scary. And I remember friends of mine brought meetings to the hospital. You know, we had meetings at the hospital. And I wasn't prepared because he was so early. And this was the other amazing thing about the program. I didn't have anybody to watch Chewy. I didn't have a bag packed, nothing. And so many people from recovery showed up. You know, my friend Mike went and stayed at my house and took care of Chewy. And like this woman I barely even knew ended up showing up at the hospital with like a brand new bathrobe. And people from recovery, I remember this guy came and told me the story of how his twins were born premature, and that was before sonograms, and he didn't even know he was going to have twins. And, you know, so it was just my connection and my faith in a higher power has been fortified over and over and over and over by the universe always giving me what I need and more, even when I have no idea where it's going to come from. I became a mom, went through some pretty hard stuff, and I really think that becoming a mom for me was when I finally grew up. I finally learned how to like wait on hold for things and how to fill out paperwork for things and how to do all these things that just scared me, how to apply for graduate school, all that stuff, and how to take care of my son. And then I was alone, and I had never been alone. It was kind of hard to date when I had a baby, but then I was working with a sponsor at the time, and we together decided that this is going to be an intentional time of being alone for at least a year, that I'm going to just take care of myself, take care of my son, and cultivate the love around me that isn't romantic love, and let that be enough. I did a 4-step in which, at the part where it talks about the ideal, instead of writing about who I wanted, which I never knew what was good for me anyway, I wrote about who I wanted to be, what kind of person I wanted to be in a relationship, what a healthy relationship might look like. That was a big shift for me, just working on becoming that person instead of looking for the person who was going to fix me.
Right.
So I was alone for a long time, and I did a lot of reaching out to, you know, friends in the program so that I would not feel so isolated. And Dylan grew, and I went to graduate school, and I got a master's degree, and I look back on that now. He didn't sleep. He was not a sleeper. But really all I did was take care of him and go to school and get to a meeting when I could. Like, it was pretty lonely, but I did it, and I got a master's degree. When I got my degree and at my graduation, I had this moment that really helped me understand humility in a new way. And, you know, lots of people congratulated me. My family was there, my friends were there. And every time someone said, "Oh, Sarah, we're so proud of you, congratulations," my head would go to this place where I would say, well, I really didn't do that great, because there were some times where, like, Dylan had an ear infection and I was late to class. It was like my parents had to pay for the whole thing, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, it was like I couldn't take the credit for what I had done. And in my head, this little voice just came and just said, just say thank you. Say thank you. Knowing that it was either I'm not good enough or why haven't you recognized how awesome I am? And then just, yeah, I did do something great. And it's okay for people to acknowledge it and for me to just say thank you. That for me was a real test, a real true understanding of humility. So anyway, shortly after that, I met my husband.
How'd you meet him?
I met him in a childcare room, an AA meeting. So Dylan's dad, Sean, long story short, you know, I was all heartbroken over my boyfriend in Costa Rica who I thought I was going to marry and all that, and he turned out to be a douche. And I came back and I was a wreck, you know, and I was super heartbroken, and I was trying to look at all my stuff with men, and then I decided to not do that. And instead I was a flight attendant for a little bit, and I don't know if you remember that. That's why I left. I became a flight attendant. And
I remember that.
I met Sean at a meeting in San Francisco, and I totally could tell from the get-go that he was bad news, and it was exactly what I wanted, you know. And long story short, I moved him here to Portland with me, paid for everything. Like, he was a total loser, and I got pregnant. He left, and we went through some tumultuous custody stuff and all kinds of awful shit, and he's gone. He hasn't been involved in a long time, but there was a period where he was watching Dylan on Saturday mornings, and that was when I was going to my one meeting a week when Dylan was a baby. And then he just vanished, and I hadn't been to a meeting in, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks, because I was terrified to leave my son. Like, I just would not leave him in a daycare room. I was too freaked out. So I did some research on, like, a meeting that had childcare. And I went there the week before, and I, like, observed the child care person. I didn't go to the meeting. I just sat there with Dylan and, like, observed her. She was just a volunteer from the meeting. She wasn't a certified babysitter or anything. And I, like, interviewed her and was like, okay, I'll come back next week. I came back and there was no one doing childcare. And I was like, what the fuck? So Dylan was 1.5 years old. And I walked into the meeting with him on my hip and was like, there's no one in there to do childcare. I haven't been to a meeting in forever. And Michael stands up and he's like, I'll do childcare. My daughter's in there anyway. And I looked at him and I was like, yeah, that's okay. No thanks. There's no way to stop my kid. You look like you've been to jail and hurt people. No.
He does.
I know.
I've seen the pictures. Guy's got tats all over.
I know. And he has a tattoo across his chest that says psycho. So,
oh my God.
Which I couldn't see at the time, but still, I was like, you're not watching my kid. And all the women in the meeting were like, oh, no, he's great. Don't worry. It'll be fine. So I sat in this AA meeting and could not think of anything other than my child in jeopardy in the room, like across the hall, and just like couldn't barely stay in my seat. But of course, Dylan was fine. And then I kept seeing him at that meeting, and eventually something shifted in the way I looked at him. Like I can remember the moment where all of a sudden I was like, kind of hot. And I've been single a long time, and I've been doing a lot of work on myself, and I kind of put it out there that he should invite me to go do something, and he totally didn't. And I was okay, whatever, you're lame. And then he found me on Facebook, and he's like, oh my God, I was totally kicking myself that I didn't ask you out, and blah, blah, blah. And that was it. And the rest is history. That was 6 years ago. We dated, and we actually dated, slowly. Made decisions to not move forward quickly, and we did things differently, and we brought God into our relationship, and we have had a wonderful love affair, a great adventure, and he's my best friend. We've gone through the trials and tribulations of dealing with exes who are not in recovery, how to take care of our kids. And when I met him, I was starting my very first teaching job, and he had just gotten accepted to become an apprentice, to become an electrician. So we were starting our careers, and we've been, helped each other through that. I do want to tell one little story so when I got my first teaching job, my job was in a town that's about 45 minutes south of Portland. I couldn't get hired in Portland, so I had to accept this job. And I was really worried about how I was going to take care of Dylan because no daycare opened that early. I had to drop him off at 5:45 in the morning, and I had I searched and searched and searched. I could not find anything. And in the meantime, it was summer, and I was still in graduate school, just taking a couple extra courses. I would walk him to the daycare, which was right up the street from my house, about 5 blocks away, and I'd walk him on my back, and I'd have Chewy with me, my dog. Chewbacca every morning would run into this little chihuahua named Ticos on the walk, and the owner of Ticos lived in the house right next to my son's daycare. So every morning, Ticos and Chewy would say hi to each other, and I'd say to the owner, and I'd drop off Dylan, and I'd go back, and I'd go to school. And one day, for whatever reason, after I dropped off Dylan, she and I just started chatting. And somehow I was telling her how I had no idea what I was going to do because I got this job, and I couldn't find daycare anywhere that opened that early, and blah, blah, blah. And she lives right next door to the daycare that my son goes to, and she goes, well, I could watch him in the morning. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. Thank you. We'll see. And in the meantime, I got to know her a little more and checked her references. And it kind of seemed like the perfect thing because she was going to just walk him next door to his daycare when it opened.
Right.
So she watched my son every single day. She never once got sick. Every morning, her phone number in my phone was saved as an alarm clock because there were days she had to call and wake me up because I wasn't up and needed to get to work. So I love that story because I was trying to solve my problem. I did every single thing in my power to solve my problem. And a Chihuahua and a Black Lab, meeting on the street, solved my problem. I never in a million years could have predicted that. And then I got the added bonus of a really, really close friend. She and I are still really close friends. It's that to me is just so much evidence of my higher power working in my life. Fast forward a few years, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, had a botched heart surgery a couple of years ago.
Really?
He died. Mm-hmm.
Oh, my God.
I was at the hospital waiting for him to come out of surgery, and I had this weird feeling that something wasn't right, and I walked up to the nurse's station, and the doctor came to tell me that they had they poked a hole in his pericardium, which is the heart wall, and they didn't know if he was going to make it or what. And there was about a 20-minute period where I remember just sitting there watching the clock, just breathing and just so aware of my breath and of like nothing else other than God just helped me. Just nothing else in the world mattered. And like my best friends showed up and sat there with me, and he made it through that, and I didn't have to get loaded over it. So yeah, shortly after that, we got married, and we had a beautiful, amazing wedding in Hawaii, which was my dream. And I totally got my dream. But we just lived this regular grown-up life, and it still trips me out every day that I'm somebody's mother. When I take my class on field trips, the first time I ever took kids out, like in the city, when it was just me and a class full of kids, and I was like, oh my God, I'm the responsible adult. Like, how did this happen? I'm in charge. And that still happens to me. I'll look down at Chewy and I'll think, me and you used to surf together and we'll run on the beach in Costa Rica, and here we are. It's a total trip. Man, I miss the fucking beach. I do.
You said that with such conviction. It's just like, oh my God.
So much. I mean, it's like my heart. What I do today is I try and get quiet and slow myself down. And I ask God to just tell me what the next right step is. That's pretty much what I do. And I go to meetings, and I have a sponsor, and I sponsor women. I just do the best I can. And the only thing I've done perfect in this whole time is not drink or use a drug. I've done everything else. I flail through it. I just flail through it. I try and come from a place of truth, and I try and be of service. And I get to be of service today to 24 children every day, and 4 of them at home. I'm overwhelmed a lot of the time, but when I'm in a more centered place, what I realize is that I actually have the skills to do this. I know how to grocery shop for 6 people and cook for 6 people. I know how to teach. I know how to read bedtime stories and give baths and make sure they eat their vegetables. Like, I actually know how to do these things, and clearly God thinks I can. It's not my plan. My plan was to live in tropical paradise with my boyfriend. Everything else since then has been a big surprise. So, yeah, that's what the last few years have been like. Oh, that's my story.
Oh, it's appropriate for me to say this right now. HP, baby.
Yeah. I can't believe how long I talked. My God. And you listen.
HP, baby. Your story is another story that is riddled with God shots throughout the entire story. God has been just so taking care of you this whole time.
Yeah.
As you're trying to kill yourself, he's just constantly he's just constantly placing himself in front of you through people, places, and things. And it's a beautiful story.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me share it. I feel that was very cathartic.
Anyway, listen, thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us. This was an amazing story and absolutely inspirational for all of our newcomers.
Thank you.
No doubt about it. So thanks again.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, let's go into the last part of the show, which I call For the Newcomer.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery, and you're going to respond with inspiring and insightful answers that you can share with our newcomers.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
You're going to do great. All right. Number 1, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
Denial. Definitely denial. I was not able to see the truth. I truly believe that for whatever reason, when I got that moment of clarity, that all of a sudden that denial broke. Over the years of doing the step work, that happens in less profound ways, but still all the time, these layers just coming to truth. And I think for me, that was the biggest thing standing in my way of getting sober. And, looking at the differences, looking at how I didn't wake up in the morning with the shakes and, sit on the street with a paper bag getting drunk. So clearly I wasn't an alcoholic,
Right. Of course not.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, let's talk about that. I'm going to ask you question number 2, which is, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery, when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover.
I talked a little bit about when that moment was. For whatever reason, that day after I'd hung up on my boyfriend and, picked up the big book, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks that I blacked out wherever I went and that I really was an alcoholic. That probably wasn't the moment that I actually thought there was hope for me to recover. I'm not exactly sure when that happened, but there were definitely God shots along the way. One of those was I went to see Ben Harper, and I had, 3 weeks sober or something, and I was totally worried, and I brought a bunch of people with me from recovery, and because I knew he was going to sing that song, Burn One Down, and everybody was going to get stoned, and I was terrified that I was going to get stoned. And he starts to sing the song, and he stopped himself, and he goes, "How many pot smokers are in the audience?" And a bunch of people cheer. And then he's like, "How many not pot smokers are in the audience?" A few people cheer. And he said, "I'm getting older." He said, "I'm a parent now." And he said, "I feel like when I sing the song, I have to do it with responsibility." And he said, "I just want to say that if you're looking around your life and you're not where you want to be, it's time to put the bong down. Put the bong down." And I was like, oh my God, he's talking to me. Ben Harper's talking to me. That was one of the first moments where I realized, because I thought I would never be able to have fun again. I would never be able to go to shows. I wouldn't be able to dance. I wouldn't be able to be cool if I couldn't get high. And it was in that moment I realized that I could. And I think that was probably one of my first moments of hope.
Sarah, you have such a wonderful story. It just doesn't stop. You have a million great stories. Seriously, your story is for newcomers. It's for women in the fellowship that need to hear. You have such a great voice.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You keep coming back.
I will. I promise.
And share your story more. You should be on a circuit.
Oh, don't even tell me that. When I had 3 weeks sober and I went to my first speakers meeting, I was, why am I not the one doing this? I have always been like, when am I going to be asked to be a circuit speaker? My total ego of just
Listen, you and I, very much the same, all right? I'm doing a podcast right now because of it, all right?
Got the smooth DJ voice down. It's awesome.
Well, thank you. I had 2 weeks sober when I heard my first speaker on a circuit, all right? Well, actually, I was at the FRICNA Regional Convention of Narcotics Anonymous in Florida with my sponsor, 2 weeks sober. This guy named Osman D., who I posted on the Share podcast, and I heard this guy speak, and I said, that is going to be me in 10 years, all right? No question about it. 2 weeks sober, and I was already there.
Yeah, that's the same with
How
me.
we roll, baby.
Totally. Yeah.
All right, so number 3. Do you have a favorite book you would recommend to a newcomer that you read in early recovery?
Yeah. So aside from all the AA literature or whatever 12-step literature, there's a book I read that was recommended to me called Drinking a Love Story by Carolyn Knapp, Knapp. And that was a very good book, especially for women in recovery.
Perfect. That's exactly. We need more books for women. All right.
It's a really good one. Yeah, Drinking a Love Story. That's
going to be listed in the show notes, folks. All right. And number 4, what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
Probably to just try and take a nap and not get high that day. But
oh, this is awesome.
I think a prayer that was suggested to me is just to ask to see things from a different perspective, because the alcoholic mind is warped, and often the way we see things is not accurate, or at least the way we see it is not good. And so just a prayer of, God, please help me see this from a different perspective, or help me be willing to look at this from a different perspective, I think has been really helpful.
Beautiful. I love it. Well then, number 5, if you could give a newcomer only one suggestion, what would that be?
Look for the similarities, not the differences. If you don't hear anything you relate to, go to another meeting and keep going until you relate to something.
Excellent. Great suggestion, Sarah. And before we say goodbye, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Of all the meetings you have attended anywhere in the world, which group is your favorite, and where is that group located?
Oh, that's so hard.
You can have more than one.
Okay, well, Kihei Morning Serenity in Kihei, Maui, meets at 7 a.m. Monday through Saturday. That meeting's awesome. Every time I go to Hawaii, I wish that was my home group. My home group here in Portland is Eastside Sunrise, which happens every day of the week at 6 a.m. and then again at 7 a.m. And so that meeting's pretty awesome, too. I've been to tons of wonderful meetings all over. So
Beautiful. I love it. All right. Well, we have reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida, oh.
Thank you for joining us on the Share Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.thesharepodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then.